The richest man in the ballroom forgot how to breathe the moment he saw the woman he destroyed carrying his child. The champagne glass slipped from Ethan Whitmore's hand and shattered across the white marble floor with a crack sharp enough to silence 200 wealthy guests beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Aurora Hotel. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Violin music faded into an awkward whisper. Even the waiters froze. But Ethan barely heard any of it because 20 feet away, kneeling beside a spilled tray of champagne in a cheap black server uniform, was Claire Bennett. His ex-wife. Pregnant. Pale. Exhausted. And cleaning tables at his engagement party. For one impossible second, Ethan thought he was hallucinating. Claire was supposed to be gone from his life forever. 2 years ago, she had walked out of his penthouse apartment with one suitcase, tear-filled eyes, and a wedding ring she quietly left on the kitchen counter. After that, she disappeared. No calls. No social media. No lawyers demanding money. Nothing. Ethan told himself she had moved on. He wanted to believe that. But now she was here beneath the golden lights of his luxury engagement celebration, wiping expensive wine off the floor while guests in $1,000 suits stared at her like she didn't belong in the same room. Claire kept her head down as if avoiding his eyes could somehow erase the humiliation burning across her face. A loose strand of blonde hair had fallen from her bun. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for broken glass. One hand instinctively rested against the curve of her stomach. 7 months pregnant at least. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. "Sir?" one of his investors whispered beside him. "Are you okay?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the date suddenly slammed into his mind like a freight train. 7 months. Claire left him 7 months ago. Behind him, Vanessa Sinclair noticed his expression and immediately followed his stare across the ballroom. Her manicured smile tightened the second she saw Claire. Vanessa looked stunning tonight in a diamond-covered silver gown custom made in Paris. Every camera in the room had been following her all evening. But now every eye was turning somewhere else. Toward the pregnant waitress kneeling on the marble floor. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply as she walked forward, forcing a laugh loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Unbelievable," she said coldly. "They really hire anyone these days." Claire slowly stood, keeping her eyes lowered. "I'll clean it up, ma'am." Ethan flinched at the sound of her voice. Softer than he remembered. Tired. Vanessa glanced at Claire's stomach and smirked. "Careful with the trays, sweetheart. Some of us are trying to celebrate tonight." A few uncomfortable chuckles spread through the ballroom. Claire nodded silently, but as she bent to grab the last champagne flute, a folded piece of paper slipped from her apron pocket and landed near Ethan's polished shoes. Ethan picked it up automatically. His fingers froze the second he unfolded it. Ultrasound images. A due date. And beneath the patient information line, one section was completely blank. Father's name. Ethan stared at the ultrasound photo as the noise of the ballroom faded into a dull ringing inside his head. The due date burned into his vision like a brand. October 17th. His fingers tightened around the paper. Claire had left his penthouse apartment on March 3rd after their final argument. 7 months ago. The math hit him so hard he nearly dropped the image. "Give that back." Claire's voice was quiet but urgent now. She reached for the paper, but Ethan stepped back instinctively. For the first time that night, their eyes fully met. The ballroom disappeared around them. No investors. No photographers. No champagne towers or crystal lights. Just the two people who once promised each other forever standing in the ruins of what used to be love. Ethan remembered those eyes. Claire used to look at him like he was the safest place in the world. Tonight they looked exhausted. Guarded. Like someone who had learned the hard way not to trust hope. "Claire," he said carefully, almost unable to recognize his own voice. "Is this—" He could not finish the sentence. Vanessa immediately stepped between them, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Ethan, sweetheart. The guests are waiting for the speech." She glanced at the ultrasound photo in his hand, then at Claire's stomach, and her expression darkened for half a second before the polished socialite mask returned. Honestly, Vanessa laughed lightly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Women pull this kind of stunt all the time around rich men. Claire's face paled, but she said nothing. That silence unsettled Ethan more than anger would have. 2 years ago Claire would have defended herself instantly. She would have cried. Argued. Demanded he listen. Tonight she simply reached for the serving tray beside her as if humiliation had become routine. Ethan suddenly remembered the last night he saw her. Rain hammered against the windows of his penthouse while financial news played across 3 giant television screens. Whitmore Technologies had finally reached billionaire status after years of impossible pressure. Investors wanted interviews. Reporters camped outside the building. Ethan had spent months sleeping 4 hours a night chasing a future he believed they both wanted. Then Vanessa entered his life like a perfectly timed opportunity. Elegant. Connected. Raised inside Manhattan high society. She understood investors, luxury branding, political donors. At least that was what Ethan told himself. Claire did not belong in those rooms anymore. That was the lie he repeated until it sounded true. He still remembered Claire standing barefoot in their kitchen holding a mug of tea while he explained why the marriage was no longer working. You deserve someone who can give you a normal life, he had said coldly. And I deserve someone who understands where I am headed. Claire had stared at him for almost 10 full seconds before quietly asking one question. Was there ever a point where you still loved me? Ethan never answered. He watched her pack one suitcase that night without crying once. By morning she was gone. And now she was here wearing a cheap black uniform with a silver name tag that read Clara because apparently even the hotel management had not cared enough to spell her real name correctly. Ethan felt sick. Sir? The event coordinator whispered nervously beside him. The media from Forbes and Manhattan Elite are asking when the engagement presentation starts. Ethan ignored him completely. His eyes stayed fixed on Claire. Why didn't you tell me? He asked softly. Vanessa's head snapped toward him. Claire inhaled slowly before answering. Because you made it very clear you did not want me in your future. The words landed harder than any accusation. Around them, guests pretended not to stare while secretly recording everything on their phones beneath the tablecloths. Manhattan society loved nothing more than a billionaire scandal. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan, wrapping one manicured hand around his arm possessively. This is inappropriate, she said firmly. She is an employee causing drama at our engagement party. Claire lowered her gaze again. I am sorry. I did not know this event was yours until I arrived. Ethan looked around the ballroom, suddenly seeing everything differently. The 12-foot floral arrangements. The imported ice sculptures. The giant digital screen displaying engagement photos of him and Vanessa smiling beneath private jets and Mediterranean sunsets. Millions of dollars spent celebrating a future that suddenly felt hollow. Claire adjusted the tray in her shaking hands and quietly turned toward the kitchen doors. But before she could take a second step, the massive ballroom entrance opened again. Cold night air swept inside. Every head turned. Outside beneath the glowing hotel lights, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom had just pulled up to the red carpet. And the moment the driver opened the rear door, the mood inside the ballroom changed instantly. The entire ballroom seemed to inhale at the same time as the black Rolls-Royce Phantom stopped beneath the glowing entrance canopy of the Grand Aurora Hotel. Even the photographers near the engagement stage lowered their cameras for a second, trying to understand why half the investors in the room suddenly looked nervous. Ethan recognized the car immediately. Every billionaire in Manhattan recognized that car. The custom silver emblem on the door belonged to Hayes International Holdings, one of the largest luxury hospitality companies in the country. Rumors said its owner could buy entire city blocks with one phone call and still have enough left over to purchase the buildings beside them just to avoid looking at neighbors. The driver stepped aside smoothly as polished black shoes touched the red carpet. Julian Hayes emerged from the car with the calm confidence of someone who never needed to announce power because everyone else already felt it the moment he entered a room. Tall. Dark suit perfectly tailored. No security team visible because men like Julian did not need visible protection. His reputation arrived before he did. Conversations spread through the ballroom in nervous whispers. That is Julian Hayes. Why is he here? I thought he was in Switzerland this week. Does Ethan know him? Vanessa's fingers tightened around Ethan's arm immediately. Ethan barely noticed. His eyes stayed locked on the entrance while a strange tension settled into his chest. He had met Julian only twice before during private investment conferences in California. Both times Julian barely spoke more than 10 words to him. But Ethan remembered one thing clearly. Julian Hayes never attended events without a reason. Meanwhile, Claire had completely frozen near the serving station beside the ballroom wall. The second she saw Julian step inside, her expression changed in a way Ethan did not miss. Not fear. Not surprise. Something more dangerous. Recognition. Claire immediately lowered her gaze and turned away as if trying to disappear before Julian noticed her. Too late. Julian's eyes scanned the ballroom once, then stopped directly on Claire. The entire atmosphere shifted. Ethan felt it instantly. So did everyone else. Julian did not glance at the engagement decorations. He did not acknowledge the cameras or the celebrities gathered around the champagne tower. He walked straight toward the pregnant waitress standing beside the service entrance like the rest of the room no longer existed. Vanessa forced a bright smile and stepped forward quickly. Mr. Hayes, she said smoothly, extending her hand. What an incredible surprise. Welcome to our engagement celebration. Julian barely glanced at her hand. Thank you? His voice was calm and deep, controlled. But his eyes never left Claire. Vanessa slowly lowered her hand awkwardly. The silence that followed became painful. Ethan stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. Julian, he said carefully. I did not know you were invited. I was not. That answer landed like ice water across the ballroom. A few guests exchanged nervous looks. Julian finally stopped in front of Claire. Up close, Ethan noticed something that made his stomach twist harder. Claire looked emotional for the first time all night. Not humiliated. Not frightened. Emotional. Julian's expression softened slightly as he looked at her pale face and trembling hands. You should not still be working, he said quietly. Claire gave a tiny shake of her head. I told you I was fine. You almost fainted yesterday. Ethan's pulse spiked instantly. Yesterday? Vanessa noticed it too. Her smile vanished another inch. Julian gently took the heavy serving tray from Claire's hands before she could protest. The movement was simple, respectful, careful around her pregnancy. But it hit Ethan harder than any public insult could have. Because Ethan suddenly realized he had not looked at Claire that gently in years. Claire, Ethan interrupted, unable to stop himself. You know Julian Hayes? Julian finally turned toward him fully. The room went silent again. Yes, Julian answered calmly. I do. Ethan waited for more explanation. None came. Vanessa quickly recovered first. Well, this is certainly unexpected. She laughed tightly. Small world, apparently. Julian's eyes moved toward her slowly. Not really. Vanessa's smile disappeared completely now. Across the ballroom, several guests had already pulled out their phones beneath the tables, recording every second. Manhattan society could smell disaster the way sharks smelled blood in water. Ethan ignored them all. Something much more important was happening. He could feel it. Claire, he said again, this time softer. Why is Julian here? Before Claire could answer, the ballroom manager suddenly rushed toward them, pale and sweating. Mr. Hayes? He stammered nervously. We had no idea Miss Bennett was working tonight, or we never would have assigned her to this event. Ethan frowned immediately. Miss Bennett. Not Clara. The manager swallowed hard. She only took the shift because one of our employees called in sick this afternoon. Claire looked embarrassed now. Please stop, she whispered quietly. I do not want a scene. But the scene had already started. Julian looked toward the manager without emotion. Did you schedule a 7-month pregnant woman to carry trays for 6 hours? The manager nearly stopped breathing. Sir, I did not realize she was. That was not my question. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan watched the manager panic while something ugly settled into his chest. Guilt. Real guilt. Because suddenly he could see it all clearly. Claire's tired eyes. The way she held her lower back every few minutes. The cheap shoes clearly not made for standing all night. While he spent millions on imported flowers and designer champagne towers, the woman who once shared his apartment had been cleaning tables to survive. Ethan felt sick again. Vanessa immediately stepped closer to him, lowering her voice sharply. Do not do this here, she whispered through clenched teeth. The media is watching. Ethan ignored her. His attention remained on Claire. You should have called me, he said. Claire gave a small tired laugh that somehow hurt more than anger ever could. For what exactly, Ethan? He had no answer. Because she was right. What would she have called him for? The man who chose social status over his marriage? The man who looked at her one rainy night and decided she no longer fit the future he wanted? Ethan opened his mouth again, but another voice interrupted from nearby. Wait a second. A silver-haired investor stepped closer, staring between Claire and Ethan. Did she say 7 months pregnant? The investor's wife immediately looked horrified as realization spread through several nearby guests all at once. Ethan felt every eye in the ballroom slowly turning toward him now. The timeline. They were all calculating the timeline. Vanessa stepped forward, instantly laughing louder now. This is ridiculous, she snapped. People get pregnant every day. It does not mean anything. But her voice sounded strained for the first time tonight. Julian calmly reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed a folded envelope. Actually, he said quietly, it means quite a lot. Ethan stared at the envelope. Thick cream paper. Legal documents, maybe. Julian handed it directly to Claire. I was going to wait until tomorrow morning, he said gently. But I think you may need this now. Claire's face went pale the second she saw the envelope. Julian, you deserve the truth. Ethan stepped forward immediately. What truth? Julian finally looked directly into his eyes again, and for the first time all night Ethan saw something cold beneath the billionaire's calm expression. Disappointment. The truth, Julian said evenly. About who actually built Whitmore Technologies. The room felt completely silent. Ethan blinked once, genuinely confused. What are you talking about? Claire looked like she wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. Julian continued calmly. 3 years ago your company was 6 days away from bankruptcy. Ethan stiffened immediately. Very few people knew that. The bank rejected your emergency financing request after the San Francisco expansion failed. Your investors were already preparing liquidation paperwork. Ethan stared at him, unable to speak because every word was true. That had been the worst week of his life. He remembered sitting alone in his office at 3 in the morning believing everything was over. Then suddenly anonymous funding appeared through a private holding account and saved the company overnight. Ethan spent years trying to discover who made the transfer. The identity remained sealed behind legal protections. You told Forbes magazine your comeback was the result of strategic restructuring. Julian continued quietly. That was not true. Ethan slowly turned toward Claire. She looked down immediately, tears gathering in her eyes for the first time all night. His heartbeat became uneven. Claire, he whispered. Julian answered instead. She sold her inheritance shares from Bennett Medical Systems. Ethan felt like the floor moved beneath him. No, he breathed. Julian nodded once. $48 million. Several guests gasped openly. Vanessa's entire face lost color. Ethan stared at Claire in complete disbelief. Bennett Medical Systems. Claire's late grandfather's company. Her inheritance. She sold it? For him? Memories slammed into Ethan all at once. Claire telling him one day she no longer cared about family investments. Claire quietly saying she simplified her finances. Claire encouraging him not to give up during the collapse. Claire sitting beside him night after night while he drowned in panic and humiliation. Ethan suddenly remembered one specific moment. The exact morning the anonymous funding arrived. Claire had cried quietly in the kitchen while making coffee. At the time, Ethan assumed she was emotional from stress. Dear God. Ethan looked at her now like he was seeing her for the first time in his life. Why? He whispered brokenly. Claire finally looked up. Because I loved you. Those 4 words destroyed whatever confidence remained inside him. The ballroom felt suffocatingly quiet now. No one moved. No one spoke. Vanessa looked around desperately, realizing every socialite in Manhattan was witnessing her perfect engagement collapse in real time. This is insane, she snapped suddenly. If Claire had that kind of money, she would not be working as a waitress. Julian turned toward her slowly. She would have still had that money, he replied calmly, if she had not used it to save the man who abandoned her. Silence. Brutal silence. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. He suddenly understood something horrifying. Everything he built. Every headline. Every billionaire ranking. Every interview praising his brilliance. None of it would exist without Claire. And he threw her away anyway. Claire looked overwhelmed now by the attention pressing against her from every direction. She pressed one hand against her stomach, breathing carefully. Julian immediately noticed. You need to sit down. I am okay, she whispered. But she clearly was not. Ethan stepped forward instinctively. Claire! Before he could finish, she swayed slightly on her feet. Several nearby guests gasped. Julian caught her arm carefully before she lost balance completely. Ethan moved instantly, too, panic flashing across his face. Get a doctor! Someone shouted near the back of the ballroom. The violin music had stopped completely now. Cameras flashed wildly from every direction. Claire closed her eyes briefly, clearly fighting dizziness. Julian guided her carefully toward a nearby chair while Ethan stood frozen 2 feet away, looking absolutely helpless. Vanessa stared at the scene in horror because she understood something before anyone else did. Ethan was no longer looking at his fiancée. He was looking at the woman he never truly stopped loving. Claire sat carefully in the velvet chair near the ballroom wall, trying to steady her breathing while hundreds of eyes remained locked on her. The massive crystal chandeliers above seemed brighter now, almost blinding against her pale skin. One hand rested protectively over her stomach, while the other gripped the edge of the chair tightly enough for her knuckles to turn white. Julian knelt beside her without caring that half the wealthiest people in Manhattan were watching. Look at me, he said quietly. Claire obeyed after a second. Have you eaten anything tonight? She gave a tiny embarrassed shake of her head. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The guilt inside his chest deepened into something unbearable. He remembered how Claire used to forget meals whenever she was stressed. Back when they were married, he would leave protein bars in her purse because she always prioritized everyone else before herself. The memory nearly destroyed him. Get her water! Ethan snapped suddenly toward the hotel staff. 3 employees moved instantly. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. Ethan. Her voice was sharp now, low enough that only he could hear. You are making a scene. Ethan turned toward her slowly. A scene? He repeated quietly. Vanessa forced a strained smile as nearby guests pretended not to listen. There are reporters here from Forbes, Manhattan Elite, and Tech Horizon. If you continue this public drama, people are going to assume. Assume what? Ethan interrupted. Vanessa hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. Around them, whispers continued spreading like wildfire across the ballroom. The baby might be his. Did you hear what Julian said? $48 million? She saved his company? Oh my God! Ethan suddenly realized his engagement party was no longer an engagement party. It had become a courtroom. And every billionaire investor, every socialite, every journalist in that ballroom had silently become a witness. Claire accepted the glass of water from a server with trembling hands. Julian stayed beside her, carefully watching her expression. "Your blood pressure is probably dropping again," he murmured. Ethan immediately looked at him. "Again?" Julian's jaw tightened slightly. "She has been overworking herself for months." Claire looked uncomfortable now. "Julian, please." But Ethan could not stop hearing those words. Overworking herself. For months. While he spent weekends on yachts with investors and posed for magazine covers beside Vanessa, Claire had been carrying his child while working double shifts. The thought made him feel physically ill. "Why did you not tell me?" Ethan asked again quietly. Claire stared down into the water glass. Would it have mattered? He had no answer fast enough. Because deep down he knew the truth. 7 months ago he had been so consumed by status and ambition that he probably would have convinced himself the timing was inconvenient. That realization horrified him. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward again, unable to tolerate the direction this night was taking. "Enough," she said sharply. "This has gone far enough." Her voice carried farther this time, causing nearby conversations to stop immediately. Vanessa straightened her shoulders, regaining the polished confidence Manhattan society expected from her. "Claire, I am very sorry for whatever difficulties you are experiencing, but this is not the time or place to emotionally manipulate people." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Claire looked stunned by the accusation, but too exhausted to respond. Julian slowly stood. The room temperature seemed to drop again. "Choose your next words carefully," he said calmly. Vanessa laughed once, though the sound lacked confidence now. "I am simply saying everyone here understands exactly what this looks like. A pregnant ex-wife appears at an engagement party right before the press photos begin." She folded her arms. "Please." Ethan looked at Vanessa like he was seeing a stranger for the first time. "You think she planned this?" Vanessa immediately answered. "I think desperate people do desperate things." Silence. Heavy silence. Claire slowly lowered the water glass. Ethan noticed tears gathering in her eyes now, but she blinked them away immediately, refusing to cry in front of the ballroom. That broke something inside him. Because Claire used to cry openly around him. She trusted him once. Now she looked like someone trained by life never to show weakness publicly again. "She did not know this was our event," Ethan said coldly. Vanessa stared at him. "You are defending her?" "I am defending the truth." Vanessa's expression cracked completely for the first time all evening. Across the ballroom, several guests openly raised phones, now no longer pretending to hide recordings. Manhattan scandals traveled faster than stock prices. Julian noticed Claire breathing unevenly again and gently touched her shoulder. "You need fresh air." Claire nodded weakly. Ethan stepped forward instantly. "I will take her." Julian's eyes lifted toward him. "No." One word. "Calm." "Final." Ethan stiffened. "She is carrying my child." The confession escaped before he could stop it. The ballroom exploded into shocked whispers loud enough to drown out the violin music restarting awkwardly near the stage. Vanessa looked like someone had slapped her across the face. Ethan barely noticed because Claire was staring at him now with tears finally spilling silently down her cheeks. Not because he claimed the baby. Because for the first time in 7 months he sounded like a man who regretted losing her. Julian studied Ethan for several long seconds before answering quietly. "Then you should have acted like it sooner." Ethan felt every word hit directly into his chest. Nearby camera flashes exploded across the ballroom as journalists realized they were witnessing the collapse of one of Manhattan's most public billionaire engagements in real time. Vanessa suddenly turned toward the media coordinator near the stage. "Stop the cameras immediately." But it was already too late. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom a phone notification sound echoed loudly. Then another. Then another. Guests were already posting clips online. Claire, the pregnant waitress. Ethan's shocked reaction. Julian Hayes exposing the $48 million secret. The scandal had escaped the ballroom. And once Manhattan smelled blood in the water, there was no controlling it anymore. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like panic wrapped in expensive perfume and forced smiles. Every few seconds another phone buzzed somewhere in the crowd as social media notifications exploded across Manhattan. Clips from the engagement party were already spreading online faster than anyone could contain them. Ethan Whitmore recognizing his pregnant ex-wife. Julian Hayes exposing the $48 million secret. Vanessa Sinclair standing frozen beside a collapsing engagement stage. One entertainment blogger had already posted the headline, "Billionaire engagement turns into public scandal after pregnant ex-wife appears working as waitress." Ethan barely noticed any of it. His attention stayed completely on Claire as she tried to stand from the velvet chair. "I should go," she whispered quietly. Julian immediately steadied her arm. "You are not walking home tonight. I can take the subway." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "The subway?" Claire looked embarrassed she had said it out loud. Ethan suddenly remembered the private drivers she used to have access to while they were married. The penthouse. The luxury vacations. The life she quietly abandoned beside him while helping build his empire. And now she was talking about taking the subway home while carrying his child. Something inside Ethan cracked a little more. "No," he said firmly. "You are not taking the subway." Claire looked exhausted by all of this attention. "Ethan, please. Where are you living?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Claire hesitated too long. That hesitation terrified him. Julian answered instead. "A studio apartment in Queens." Ethan felt physically sick. Queens. A tiny studio apartment. Pregnant. Working hotel shifts. While his engagement party featured imported flowers flown in from Italy that morning. Vanessa noticed Ethan's expression changing again and panic flashed across her face. She grabbed his arm sharply. "We need to talk privately." Ethan did not move. "Not now." "Now." Her voice cracked harder than she intended. Nearby guests immediately pretended not to listen while listening to every word. Vanessa lowered her voice again. "You are humiliating me in front of the entire city." Ethan slowly turned toward her. For the first time since the scandal began, he looked tired instead of angry. "You think this is about humiliation?" Vanessa stared at him speechless. Ethan gestured toward Claire. "She sold her inheritance to save my company. She disappeared without asking for anything. And tonight I found out she has been carrying my baby while working double shifts." His jaw tightened. "So no, Vanessa. Right now I am not worried about embarrassment." The words hit Vanessa harder than any public accusation could have. Her face drained completely. Across the ballroom the investors and reporters could practically feel the engagement collapsing in real time. Claire suddenly pressed one hand against her stomach again, breathing unevenly. Julian noticed instantly. "Sit back down. I am fine." But she clearly was not. Ethan moved beside her automatically, now no longer caring who watched. "Claire, look at me." She slowly lifted her eyes toward him. "Are you in pain?" Before she could answer, an older woman stepped through the crowd carrying a small black medical bag. "I am a physician," she announced calmly. "Someone said a pregnant woman needed help." Relief spread briefly across Ethan's face. The doctor knelt beside Claire, checking her pulse carefully. "How far along are you?" "Almost 30 weeks." The doctor nodded slowly. "Stress can trigger dizziness during pregnancy, especially if you are not eating properly or resting enough." Ethan closed his eyes again, hearing that sentence. Not eating properly. Not resting enough. Every word felt like another quiet accusation against the life he forced Claire into after leaving her. Vanessa folded her arms tightly, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is getting out of hand," she muttered. Julian looked toward her without emotion. "Then perhaps you should stop making it worse." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "You seem very invested in Claire's life for someone claiming to be just a friend." Ethan looked toward Julian immediately. The question hit him too. Julian remained calm. Claire matters to me. Simple words. But Ethan hated how deeply they unsettled him. Vanessa noticed the reaction instantly. Interesting. Her eyes narrowed. So that is what this is. Claire looked alarmed. Vanessa, stop. But Vanessa had completely lost the polished socialite mask now. You disappear for months, then suddenly show up pregnant, while Julian Hayes rushes in like some billionaire savior? She shook her head, laughing coldly. Please tell me everyone here is not naive enough to believe this fairy tale. Ethan's expression darkened instantly. Enough. Vanessa turned toward him sharply. You cannot seriously believe she is innocent in all this. I believe she never lied to me. Silence. Absolute silence. Vanessa stared at him like he had stabbed her in front of the entire ballroom. Ethan realized something horrifying the second the words left his mouth. He meant them. Despite everything. Despite the divorce. Despite the years apart. Claire had never once manipulated him. Never once used his money. Never once leaked stories to the press. She simply disappeared quietly and survived however she could. Meanwhile, Vanessa suddenly looked less like a fiancée and more like a stranger wearing diamonds. Claire slowly stood again despite Julian's concern. Please stop arguing because of me. Her voice shook slightly. I never wanted any of this. Ethan looked at her, heartbreak spreading across his face. Then why did you not tell me about the baby? Claire swallowed hard before answering. Because the last thing you said to me was that I no longer fit into your future. The ballroom fell silent again. Ethan remembered saying those exact words in their penthouse kitchen while rain hit the windows behind her. At the time he thought he sounded logical, strategic, successful. Tonight those words sounded cruel, empty, pathetic. Claire looked down briefly, trying to steady herself. I did not want my child growing up feeling unwanted. Ethan's chest tightened so painfully he almost could not breathe. His child. Their child. Alone for 7 months, believing he would not want them. Nearby camera flashes exploded again, capturing every second of Ethan Whitmore looking like a man finally realizing success meant nothing if he lost the one person who loved him before the money arrived. Then suddenly another phone notification echoed loudly through the ballroom. One investor near the back looked down at his screen and went pale. Oh my God! He whispered. Several others checked their phones immediately after. Ethan frowned. What now? The investor slowly looked up toward Vanessa. Someone just leaked private emails from your publicist. Vanessa's entire body went still. Vanessa's face lost every trace of color, as more phones lit up across the ballroom like tiny explosions in the dark. The whispers spreading through the crowd no longer sounded curious. They sounded shocked. One woman near the champagne tower covered her mouth completely. A venture capitalist standing beside the orchestra muttered a curse under his breath while scrolling through his screen. Ethan grabbed the nearest phone from one of his executives without even asking permission. His heartbeat pounded violently the second he saw the headline flashing across the display. Leaked emails reveal PR manipulation behind Whitmore divorce narrative. Ethan's stomach dropped. He opened the article immediately. The ballroom around him blurred as line after line appeared in front of his eyes. Internal messages. Private communication between Vanessa's publicist and several entertainment blogs. Dates from nearly 8 months earlier. One message read, "Push the story that Claire was emotionally unstable after the separation." Another, "Make Vanessa look supportive, not involved. We need public sympathy before the merger conference." Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward Vanessa. She looked terrified now. Truly terrified for the first time all evening. "Ethan," she whispered carefully. "I can explain." But he was already scrolling further. Another leaked email appeared beneath the first. This one made his blood run cold. Delay any pregnancy rumors until engagement announcement is secured. Ethan stopped breathing. Around him more gasps erupted through the ballroom as other guests reached the same line. Claire looked confused at first until Julian quietly took a phone from someone nearby and handed it to her. Ethan watched her expression change as she read the leaked messages. Pain. Then disbelief. Then something quieter and infinitely sadder. Confirmation. As if part of her had always suspected the truth but never wanted to believe it completely. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. You knew, he said hoarsely to Vanessa. She immediately shook her head too fast. No. Not exactly. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. You knew Claire was pregnant. I only found out later. Her voice cracked. And I was trying to protect us. Protect us? Ethan repeated quietly. The ballroom had gone almost silent again except for distant phone vibrations and the faint sound of camera shutters. Vanessa stepped closer, desperately lowering her voice. Your investors already questioned whether you were stable enough for the Tokyo merger after the divorce. If Claire announced a pregnancy publicly during negotiations, it would have looked messy. I was trying to avoid another scandal. Ethan looked at her like he no longer recognized the woman standing beside him. So you leaked stories making my wife look unstable? Vanessa's eyes flashed defensively, now cornered by the truth. Your ex-wife. Ethan ignored the correction completely. You let the entire city believe she abandoned me because she could not handle pressure. Because it was easier. Vanessa snapped suddenly. Several guests jumped at the sharpness in her voice. Vanessa realized too late she had lost control. Claire lowered the phone slowly, tears gathering in her eyes again. Ethan saw them immediately, and something inside him broke completely. He remembered those months after the divorce. The interviews. The articles. The gossip columns painting Claire as fragile and emotionally overwhelmed, while Vanessa appeared beside him at charity galas looking composed and supportive. Ethan never questioned where those stories came from. God. Claire had been carrying his child through all of it. Alone. Julian stepped slightly closer to Claire, now protective, without saying a word. Ethan noticed and hated himself for understanding exactly why Claire trusted Julian instead of him. Julian had shown up. Ethan had not. Vanessa looked around desperately at the judgment spreading across the ballroom. Everyone here acts so innocent, she snapped bitterly. Do you know how this world works? Image matters. Reputation matters. Not more than people, Ethan answered coldly. Vanessa stared at him, wounded now. I stood beside you when your company exploded into the public eye. Claire stood beside me before I had a company. Silence crashed through the ballroom. That sentence landed harder than any scream could have. Claire looked stunned by the words herself. Ethan finally turned fully toward her now. His expression no longer looked defensive or confused. It looked devastated. You lost everything because of me. Claire gave a tiny, sad shake of her head. No, Ethan. I lost everything because I loved someone who stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a liability. The honesty in her voice shattered whatever remained of his pride. Ethan looked down briefly, struggling to breathe through the guilt crushing his chest. He suddenly remembered every small thing he ignored during the final months of their marriage. Claire waiting awake for him at midnight with dinner gone cold. Claire canceling her own plans because he needed support during investor meetings. Claire quietly smiling through loneliness while he chased headlines and billionaire rankings. He thought success meant sacrificing distractions. Tonight he realized the only real thing in his life had never been a distraction at all. A nearby reporter suddenly stepped closer, raising a microphone carefully. Mr. Whitmore, is it true your ex-wife secretly funded your company while pregnant and homeless? Several publicists immediately tried blocking cameras, but nobody could stop the media chaos anymore. Ethan ignored the reporter completely. His eyes stayed on Claire. Homeless? He repeated softly. Claire looked uncomfortable now, clearly wishing the marble floor would swallow her whole. Julian answered quietly. For 3 weeks after leaving the penthouse, she lived in a temporary shelter because the joint accounts had already been frozen. Ethan physically flinched. What? Julian's voice remained calm, but every word cut deeper. She refused to contact you. Ethan looked horrified. Why would you not call me? Claire swallowed hard before answering. Because I heard you tell Vanessa on the phone that week you were relieved the divorce was finally over. Ethan closed his eyes, instantly remembering the conversation. He had said it during merger negotiations while exhausted and frustrated, believing Claire was already rebuilding her own life somewhere else. He never imagined she was listening from the hallway carrying their unborn child while trying to decide where she would sleep that night. Ethan suddenly felt like the worst man in Manhattan, regardless of how many billions sat in his accounts. Claire slowly stood from the chair again, wiping tears from beneath her eyes before anyone else could notice them. I do not want this anymore, she whispered tiredly. Please just let me leave. Ethan instinctively reached toward her but stopped himself halfway. Because for the first time he understood something painful. He no longer had the right to ask anything from her. The ballroom suddenly felt too bright for Ethan to breathe in. Camera flashes bounced off the crystal chandeliers while whispers moved through the crowd like wildfire trapped beneath glass. Claire stood near the velvet chair, looking smaller than she had ever looked before, one hand resting protectively against her stomach while exhaustion settled into every line of her face. Ethan hated himself for noticing how tired she seemed only now. 7 months too late. Claire, he said quietly, stepping closer again. Please let me help you. She gave him a sad smile that somehow hurt worse than anger. You already helped me once, Ethan. He frowned, slightly confused. Claire looked down for a second, before continuing softly. You taught me what it feels like to survive alone. The words hit him so hard he forgot the ballroom existed. Across the room, reporters continued filming while Manhattan's elite watched one of the city's most powerful billionaires slowly realize his success had cost him the only person who ever loved him before the headlines and private jets. Vanessa folded her arms tightly beside the stage, trying to hold on to whatever dignity she still had left. This is unbelievable, she muttered under her breath. But nobody cared anymore. Not the investors. Not the reporters. Not even the socialites who once treated Vanessa like royalty. Every eye remained fixed on Claire. The pregnant woman in the cheap black uniform who somehow carried more grace, standing exhausted in a ballroom than anyone else there, wrapped in diamonds. Julian stepped beside Claire calmly. The car is waiting outside. Claire nodded faintly. Ethan immediately looked toward him. Where are you taking her? Julian met his eyes evenly. Somewhere she can finally rest. Ethan hated how powerless that answer made him feel. For years he controlled everything around him. Markets. Mergers. Billion-dollar negotiations. Tonight he could not even convince the mother of his child to let him walk her to the door. Claire adjusted the loose sweater around her shoulders, preparing to leave, when another sharp wave of dizziness hit her unexpectedly. She grabbed the edge of the chair quickly. Ethan reacted instantly, reaching her before anyone else. Claire. Panic filled his voice now openly. Sit down. The physician from earlier moved closer again, concern crossing her face. Her pulse is elevated. Claire inhaled carefully, trying to steady herself. I am okay. No, the doctor answered gently. You are exhausted. Ethan looked terrified hearing those words. Truly terrified. Not for his reputation. Not for the scandal exploding online. For her. Julian watched Ethan carefully, noticing the difference too. Claire lowered herself slowly back into the chair while Ethan knelt beside her without caring that cameras immediately captured the moment. One of Manhattan's youngest billionaires on one knee in front of the ex-wife he abandoned. Have you seen a doctor regularly? Ethan asked quietly. Claire hesitated. Too long. Ethan's stomach dropped. Claire. She avoided his eyes. Prenatal care is expensive. Silence slammed through him. Ethan stared at her, unable to process what she just admitted. You skipped appointments? Claire looked ashamed now. Only some? Julian answered coldly. She worked through flu season because she could not afford unpaid days off. Ethan looked physically ill hearing that. He remembered buying a $2 million watch 3 months ago after closing a merger deal in Miami. $2 million. Meanwhile, Claire had been deciding whether she could afford prenatal appointments for their baby. He suddenly wanted to tear the ballroom apart piece by piece with his bare hands just to stop hearing the truth about what her life became after he left. Vanessa noticed Ethan's expression darkening further, and finally snapped completely. "Oh my God, enough already!" Her voice echoed sharply across the ballroom, causing conversations to stop instantly again. Vanessa stepped forward, glaring directly at Claire now. "Everyone is acting like she is some helpless victim when she clearly hid this pregnancy on purpose." Ethan stood immediately. "Stop talking." But Vanessa ignored him. "No, Ethan. Think about this rationally for once. She waited until your engagement party to appear? She conveniently has Julian Hayes defending her? She disappears for months, then suddenly becomes the center of attention right before your Tokyo expansion?" Claire looked stunned by the accusation, while Ethan's face hardened dangerously. "That is enough." Vanessa laughed bitterly, tears finally gathering in her own eyes now. "You are really choosing her over me?" Ethan answered without hesitation this time. "I am choosing the truth." The sentence shattered whatever remained of the engagement. Even the orchestra stopped playing entirely now. Vanessa stared at him like she no longer knew the man standing in front of her. Then suddenly another notification sound echoed loudly near the ballroom entrance. A reporter looked down at his phone and inhaled sharply. "Whitmore Technology's stock just dropped 12%. Several investors immediately pulled out their devices. The market was reacting in real time." Ethan barely looked up. 6 months ago, news like that would have consumed him completely. Tonight he only cared whether Claire looked pale because she was stressed or because she had not eaten enough today. That realization stunned him almost as much as everyone else. Claire slowly looked up at Ethan, noticing the change in his face. The ambition that once burned there endlessly suddenly looked smaller tonight. Human. Regretful. "You should focus on your company," she whispered quietly. Ethan looked directly into her eyes. "I spent years focusing on the wrong thing." Claire's breath caught slightly hearing that. Around them the ballroom had transformed completely from luxury celebration into emotional wreckage. Half-empty champagne glasses sat untouched across the tables. Flower arrangements worth thousands of dollars no longer mattered. The giant engagement screen behind the stage still played smiling photographs of Ethan and Vanessa vacationing through Europe, but now the images looked hollow beneath the reality unfolding in front of everyone. Julian glanced toward the entrance where security staff struggled to control growing media chaos outside the hotel. "We need to leave before this gets worse." Ethan immediately answered. "I am coming with you." Claire looked startled. Julian remained unreadable. "Why?" Ethan swallowed hard before answering honestly for the first time in years. "Because I do not want her walking out of my life again thinking she was never loved." The silence after Ethan's confession felt louder than the orchestra ever had. Hundreds of wealthy guests stood frozen beneath the crystal chandeliers, watching one of Manhattan's most powerful men stare at the woman he had once walked away from, as if he finally understood what losing her truly meant. Claire looked shaken by his words. Not because she did not believe him completely, but because part of her had spent 7 painful months trying to stop wanting to hear them. Julian studied Ethan carefully for several long seconds before speaking. "Love is easy to claim after damage is already done." Ethan did not argue, because he knew Julian was right. Claire slowly reached for her coat draped over the back of the chair. Her movements looked tired now, like even standing required effort. Ethan instinctively stepped forward to help her but stopped himself midway again. The hesitation did not go unnoticed by Claire. She saw it immediately. The guilt. The uncertainty. The fear that he no longer knew whether he was welcome anywhere near her life. Vanessa stood near the engagement stage staring at the giant digital slideshow still cycling through smiling photographs of her and Ethan across Europe. Paris. Monaco. Aspen. Every image now looked fake beneath the reality unfolding in front of the ballroom. "Turn that screen off," she snapped suddenly at the event staff. Nobody moved fast enough. The screen behind her shifted again, displaying another glamorous photo of Ethan kissing her forehead on a yacht in Greece, while 20 feet away the pregnant ex-wife he abandoned stood preparing to leave in a borrowed server uniform. The contrast was brutal. Vanessa laughed once bitterly. "Do you know what is actually pathetic?" Her voice echoed sharply enough to stop nearby whispers again. Claire closed her eyes briefly, already exhausted by conflict. Ethan looked toward Vanessa warily. But Vanessa had finally reached the point where humiliation burned hotter than caution. Everyone here suddenly acting like Claire is some perfect saint. She folded her arms tightly, trying to hold herself together. "Do you all want the truth? Fine. Here is the truth." Ethan's expression darkened. "Vanessa." She ignored him completely. "I did not destroy your marriage by myself." Silence spread instantly. Claire looked up slowly. Ethan's jaw tightened. Vanessa laughed again, but now tears mixed with the sound. "You were already drifting away from her long before I showed up. You loved being admired more than you loved being married." Ethan flinched because every word hit too close to reality. Vanessa pointed toward the giant ballroom around them. "This life mattered to you. The interviews. The investors. The headlines. You wanted a woman who fit beside all of this." Claire lowered her eyes, hearing the truth spoken aloud. Ethan looked devastated now because he remembered it clearly. The way he slowly stopped bringing Claire to networking events because she hated fake conversations. The way he became embarrassed when she wore simple dresses beside billionaire wives covered in diamonds. God. He had changed long before the divorce papers appeared. Vanessa wiped at her tears angrily. "But yes, I pushed things too. Happy now?" The ballroom went completely still. Even the reporters stopped moving for a second. Vanessa looked directly at Claire now. "I leaked stories because I wanted people to stop seeing you as the perfect wife." Claire looked stunned. Vanessa's voice cracked harder. "I paid photographers to follow Ethan and me before the divorce was final because I knew public pressure would make him end things faster." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "You told me those photos were accidental." Vanessa gave a hollow laugh. "Nothing about Manhattan media is accidental." Several guests openly gasped now. Cameras flashed wildly across the ballroom. Claire looked physically hurt, hearing the confirmation of everything she quietly feared during those final months of marriage. Ethan rubbed one hand across his face like he could no longer process the collapse happening around him. "And the pregnancy rumors?" he asked quietly. Vanessa hesitated. That hesitation answered him before words did. Ethan's voice dropped dangerously soft. "You knew." Vanessa looked cornered now. "One of the assistants at your old doctor's office mentioned Claire might be pregnant after the divorce, and I panicked." Claire inhaled sharply. Ethan looked absolutely shattered. Vanessa stepped closer, desperately trying to explain herself. "I thought if you found out then you would go back to her." Ethan stared at her, unable to speak. "Because despite everything," Vanessa whispered brokenly, "you never looked at me the way you looked at Claire." Silence crashed through the ballroom. The truth sat there between all of them, impossible to ignore anymore. Claire slowly looked toward Ethan, then away again almost immediately because seeing regret on his face hurt more than anger ever could. Ethan remembered every moment now with painful clarity. Every time Vanessa complained that he seemed distracted. Every argument where she accused him of still thinking about Claire. At the time he denied it. Tonight he realized he had been lying mostly to himself. Julian stepped beside Claire protectively again, sensing how emotionally exhausted she had become. "This conversation is over." Vanessa laughed bitterly through tears. "Of course it is. Because she wins now, right?" Claire immediately shook her head softly. "This was never about winning." Vanessa stared at her for a long moment before whispering something almost too quiet to hear. "That is why he loved you." Ethan closed his eyes hearing those words. The ballroom suddenly felt unbearably empty despite hundreds of people still standing there. Stock markets could recover. Companies could rebuild. Reputations could be repaired with enough money and time. But standing there watching Claire hold her pregnant stomach while preparing to walk away from him again, Ethan realized some losses did not come with second chances. No one moved for several seconds after Vanessa's final words faded into the silence. The ballroom looked frozen in time beneath the crystal chandeliers. Half-finished champagne glasses sat untouched on white linen tables. Reporters lowered their microphones slightly as if even they understood something sacred had just broken in front of them. Claire stood quietly near the ballroom entrance with one hand resting against her stomach, while the city's wealthiest people watched her with something they rarely gave anyone: respect. Ethan looked at her as though the entire world around him had disappeared. The stock market crash. The ruined engagement. The cameras. None of it mattered anymore. Because for the first time in years he saw everything clearly. Claire loved him when he was sleeping on a couch inside a tiny office with overdue bills stacked beside his laptop. Claire believed in him before Forbes magazine covers and private jets and billion-dollar mergers. She gave up her inheritance to save his dream, then quietly disappeared rather than force him to stay with her out of obligation. And somehow after all of that he still made her feel unwanted. Ethan swallowed hard before finally speaking again. "I do not expect forgiveness." His voice sounded rough now, stripped of the confidence Manhattan usually associated with him. Claire slowly looked toward him. "Then what do you expect?" Ethan stared at her for a long moment before answering honestly. "Nothing." The simplicity of the answer seemed to surprise everyone, including Claire. Ethan stepped closer, carefully keeping enough distance not to overwhelm her. "I spent years believing success meant becoming someone important." He glanced around the ballroom filled with luxury and silence. "Tonight I realized the most important person in my life was the one I abandoned." Claire's eyes filled again, but she quickly looked away toward the entrance doors. Outside, beyond the massive hotel windows, Manhattan glowed against the dark night sky. Traffic lights flickered. Rain had started falling softly over the city streets, turning reflections into blurred gold across the pavement. Julian checked Claire's expression carefully. "We should leave." Claire nodded slowly. Ethan's chest tightened instantly at the thought of her walking away again. But this time he forced himself not to stop her. Because love without respect had already destroyed enough. As Julian reached for Claire's coat, Ethan quietly removed his own jacket first and held it out toward her. Claire hesitated. Ethan gave a faint, sad smile. The temperature dropped 20 degrees since sunset. For a second neither of them moved. Then Claire slowly accepted the jacket. The ballroom seemed to exhale all at once, watching the small gesture. Ethan remembered every winter night he used to drape jackets over her shoulders when she fell asleep beside him working late in their apartment. Tiny acts of care he stopped noticing once ambition swallowed him whole. Claire slipped her arms into the jacket carefully around her stomach. The sleeves were slightly too long, just like they used to be years ago. Ethan looked down briefly, fighting emotion before finally saying the words he should have said long ago. "I am sorry." Not polished. Not strategic. No billion-dollar speeches or perfect explanations. Just the truth. Claire stared at him for several quiet seconds while tears gathered in her eyes again. "I know," she whispered softly. That somehow hurt him even more. Because she sounded tired rather than angry. Like she had already mourned the man she once loved months ago. Julian gently opened the ballroom doors and cool rain-scented air drifted inside. Camera flashes exploded immediately from outside, where reporters crowded beneath umbrellas waiting for the scandal of the year to continue. Security struggled to hold them back. "Miss Bennett, are you and Ethan Whitmore reconciling?" "Mr. Whitmore, is the engagement officially cancelled?" "Vanessa, did you manipulate media coverage during the divorce?" The shouting grew louder instantly. Claire looked overwhelmed by the chaos. Ethan noticed immediately. "Use the private exit," he told security firmly. "Now." The staff moved quickly, opening a side corridor away from reporters. Julian nodded once toward Ethan, acknowledging the gesture. Claire paused beside Ethan one final time before leaving. The ballroom behind them remained painfully quiet. The giant engagement screen still glowed above the empty stage, showing frozen images from a future that no longer existed. "Take care of yourself," Ethan said quietly. Claire looked at him with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. Sadness. Affection. Distance. You should do the same. Then she turned and walked away beside Julian down the private hallway, disappearing slowly from view. Ethan stood completely still, watching until the very last second he could see her. Around him, investors quietly gathered their coats. Guests began leaving without speaking. The orchestra packed instruments in silence. One by one, the ballroom lights dimmed across the massive room until only the engagement screen still illuminated the space behind him. Vanessa had already disappeared. The flowers remained untouched. The champagne had gone flat. Ethan Whitmore stood alone in the center of the most expensive party he had ever thrown and realized none of it had been enough to keep the woman who once loved him. When he had absolutely nothing. Outside in the rain, the black Rolls-Royce pulled away from the hotel, carrying Claire toward a future he no longer knew how to be part of. And for the first time in his billionaire life, Ethan understood that losing someone quietly could hurt far more than losing everything loudly.